Welcome to News for the Soul Radio. I'd like to introduce our guest for this evening, daytime, whichever time and space you're listening and now watching this. On News for the Soul, then clearly you'll be listening to this, and for people's elsewhere, then good evening, afternoon, welcome, and all the good stuff. Today we will be on the amazing subject of the Sumerian cuneiform tablets, human history then, and what does that mean now, and a whole lot more with our guest, Matt LaCroix. So first, Matt, if I may, I'll do a little bit of your bio, and then a little bit of how then I came across you and how we're here today. So Matt LaCroix is a passionate writer and researcher who grew up in the outdoors of New England, which is ironic because I live in Old England, UK. How about that? From an early age, had a strong connection back to nature, was established and built into the morals of his life. And yeah, salute that, Matt. His persistent yearning for adventure led him into profound life-changing experiences. Can't wait to hear about it, Matt. That inspired him to write for local and national magazines such as Backpacker and AMC Outdoors. While attending Plymouth State University, published his first book at the age of 22, go you, Matt, and began studying history, philosophy, quantum mechanics, and superstring theory. His focus became uncovering and connecting the esoteric teachings from secret societies and ancient cultures that disappeared long ago in our past. At 32, he publishes his second book, The Illusion of Us, which combined years of research to discover the truth about history, human origins, as well as the fundamentals of consciousness. This is going to be awesome. In 2019, he released his third book entitled The Stage of Time, which is, I guess, largely while we're here, was my draw to you, Matt. But since then there's been a lot more. So The Stage of Time, which represented a compilation of ancient texts, spiritual wisdom, and theoretical physics, combined together to find answers to some of our most difficult questions. From understanding the complexities of reality to lost history and the identity of the gods and of antiquity, no stone is left unturned in this endless pursuit of truth. And how I came across you, Matt, was initially listening to Greg Colwood's THC, so the Higher Side Chats, of which, happening to be going down my own rabbit hole, probably for the last 2 years, of human origins and talking to amazing people about what they've been documenting and writing books on and such, sort of exogenesis, and I won't sort of go to the peoples, but there's some stunning folk out there, and so it really piqued my interest. I had a lot going on at the time, so I listened to it on audio book on Audible, which highly recommended. So well done, and I really appreciate it because I get my information from everywhere, every which way. And I kind of allow for that. So it's really nice to have the audio every now and then. And I've listened to that, I don't know, a lot, at least 3 times, I'm saying. So anyway, yes, through Greg Colwood. Wow. And then, yeah, it stunned me and it spurred me into action to want to get in touch with you, Matt, and grateful for you coming on board, saying yes, getting the word out. That's obviously then the main thing. Well, not the main thing, it's a big thing, is to get this story and your story and all the research you're doing, which is immense, out there. I'm aware that you're doing a recent book currently that you're creating with Billy Carson, from Forbidden Knowledge. Yep. Epic guy. And what was his recent books, which is the compendium of the Emerald Tablets, of which has been hassle for me to get in the UK, but it's okay, I'll manage it somehow. So that must be one crazy adventure, and we'll tap into that two, no doubt, but bottom of the line, jumping there real quick, I want to say thank you, Matt, for coming on board. Welcome to LifeWise Radio. Yay!
Thank you for that really great intro and those really kind words. I really appreciate it. It's from the bottom of my heart when people connect with my work and it connects and resonates with everything that they've studied and everyone that they've discussed with this. It really brings a lot of enthusiasm and energy behind me keep going and pushing forward with all the people that provide such great feedback on how this has helped them. And to me, this has been a journey that I'll never forget. It's been an incredible ride to the point where I'm at now. And I almost look back at where all of this started, and I can't even believe that it's led to this. But it's an honor to be sitting down with you here, and thanks for having me on.
A pleasure. And again, the work you're doing, I think is, for me, it's so valuable. And obviously being with the cuneiform text, then being set in clay, you know, we're talking about some of the oldest writings that we know of, because, you know, you can't overly burn clay, it just gets stronger. You can't get it wet, well, you can, but it's not going to do anything. So, you know, this was done with purpose and has its story. And I don't know anyone who has done as much work as yourself in this realm. And so the work that you do is clearly of value, and I'm not here to kind of like overly polish halos. At the same time, credit where it's due, and I can only recommend people to check out Matt's work, because for me it's pretty essential, because there's not that many people doing this work, and those that have, like I know LaCroix Sitchin, and I know there's differences. I know there's differences there of where the stories kind of go. But if that, you know, there's, I can't count the people on one hand who have jumped into this neck of the woods. So fantastic, Matt. So I'm wondering where we can then start, because for me, what I wanted to do with this show is to, I'd like to get like the links as what can we do now in this weird time in 2020 and 2021 and looking forwards. For me, there's no big surprise, but obviously the world is shocked and trying to deal with things. So what I'd like, as we can kind of creep towards it, is what can people do? What does this story mean to people? And where we can then take that. But a good place to start. So let's go with, you know what? How about then the outdoors part? And I know that when Matt and I were just catching up before we hit record, we were talking about how imperative being outdoors is connection with nature, and how actually that then inspires adventures, which then creates its experiences, which then propels you. It's the fuel for other things that happen out of that. So do you reckon, Matt, would it be okay to kind of start there, and then that will probably lead in really pretty nicely to where we kind of want to take it?
Absolutely. Yeah. All right, I'll give just a little background on how all this started and where it began and how it led to everything it has now. In the beginning, early on, when I was a lot younger, I guess maybe even a kid, I wasn't someone that was reading a lot of this type of stuff. I wasn't looking at ancient history at all. It was always fascinating to me. I'd watch movies and was fascinated by it. But to me, I've been in school and I've been regurgitating this version that we'd been taught, and it was really simplistic and not really super interesting to me. I was interested in history always, but not to the point where it became something that changed my life and became something that I would focus on until much later. As you said, it really began with something much different. It began with this aspect of being in this society that we've created with all these certain restrictions and laws and these ways that we should perceive everything. And I remember being in high school and a lot of classes right up through I graduated, and just having this increased feeling of feeling rejected, feeling really separated and outside of this core society clique groups that I was seeing all around me, with people that were some, going to football games, and then cheerleaders, and then people just going to the mall to all get drinks, and then people all going to the movies. I wasn't part of that. I was really outside of that. And I just didn't feel like I was connecting with people. Things that I was interested in discussing, things I was interested in talking about and doing, most people just weren't that interested. And so because of that, I really felt like I was on the outside, and I was almost looking in, eating lunch in the bathroom because you don't have anyone to sit with or things like that. That was me. I was the nerd that really people didn't really like, actually, particularly at all. I was I had a lot of energy, and I was talking a lot, and people found me really awkward, and they would actually go different directions if they saw me coming, just because I'd maybe start talking with them, and it would be strange and awkward. So it wasn't, I guess that's the word to describe it. It was a really awkward time in school. But because of that, and because of the background that I'd always had as a child, having parents that spend an enormous amount of time in the outdoors and finding the value of the outdoors, versus parents that were encouraging you to go just shop all the time and just to play games all the time, and that was it. I had a whole different upbringing. My father was basically a professional fly fisherman. And so I was always out learning how to fly fishing with him, which is an incredible hobby, actually. If you think about it, it forces someone to become more balanced and patient and quiet. And someone who was off the wall like I was all the time, it was the perfect thing for me to do, to connect with my dad, to help me to calm down, to balance a little better. So between hiking out to some remote pond in the middle of nowhere, and hiking in with a backpack and going out and fly fishing with my mom, going out on hikes and camping with my mom and grandfather and all those things, I had this foundation that was established very, very early on in my life. And that was what you did. That was how you got out and had experiences, real experiences you could remember forever, and things that would change your life and have you understand the world around us. And so quickly, for me, being incredibly inquisitive about things, and that's really where this began. I was always asking questions. And so I'd be out in nature, and I would want to know what's going on. What is that tree? What kind of rock is that? What kind of river is that? I was always asking. I was always asking questions, and that would led me to want to find answers. And so quickly, it began with just sort of studying this reality around us, studying the universe, studying space, studying how vast the cosmos was for perspective. And I never forgot that perspective. And then studying the geology, the geomorphology, the flora, the fauna. I was just obsessed with learning as much as I could about my world. That was where I started all of this. And so because of feeling really awkward in school, because I had that foundation of just loving the outdoors and connecting with that rather than people in most cases, I was just taken off after school, heading up and going hiking. Even after a day after school during the week, that's how much I was screaming to want to find some better balance to what I was feeling. And so every weekend I would go off and do some adventure. I would go either climb a large mountain in the wintertime, or trudge into the most remote place I could possibly get to. And I would literally try to find something that was as far away from people as I could, with as little evidence of human activity. I was like screaming to leave it all behind. I couldn't stand it. I couldn't stand most people that I was spending time with. I couldn't understand why people were so obsessed with things that seemed trivial to me, and why most people just didn't seem to care about knowledge. It was more of just, what girl they were going to talk to, what sports game they're going to go to. So that's what led me to getting more and more extreme, though. I got to the point where I was getting into a bit of trouble, getting into situations that I probably shouldn't have been, being in really remote places and having some really bad things happen that really brought me to the very edge of even of my life. And if you want me to tell a few of those stories, we can. But the moral of that was that it allowed me to really grasp what it means to be alive and what it is to be here now. And I never ever forgot those things. And they were the ones that those experiences allowed me, or led me, to write for the very first time.
That's fantastic. Um, Where to go with this one? Have you got an example then? I think that'd be kind of cool if you got an example that you have in mind about those moments that, pit you up against, am I going to be here that much longer? So yeah,
Yeah,
what
I
was
mean,
the
there's one
scary?
story in particular. Yeah, there's one that really I always tell because it's the one that led to everything.
Oh,
It was a gradual buildup. That's the reason I wrote the first book, which is not available right now, but I'm hoping to rewrite it again someday. It was called My Wilderness, and it was an early attempt for me to become a writer, and I've grown a lot since then. But the reason I had taken on accumulating those stories and writing in the very beginning, because it started with magazines, like you read in my bio, and the reason that started was that I would have experiences that I almost couldn't even believe that had happened to me, that most people I had never heard of. Being up on a mountain in the middle of winter with winds that are over 60 miles an hour in a ground blizzard, far above tree line, and snow drifts that are up to your waist. Those experiences where you don't know if you're ever going to get off that mountain, or you don't even know where you are. That was what happened to me along the way. And there was a lot of stupid decisions made to lead up to that. It doesn't mean you have to have those bad things happen, but it allowed me to have perspective. And the one that I want to share here that led to all of this, that I guess culminated off of those other experiences, was I had made the decision in college that I wanted to go to the most remote place that I possibly could, because I had just gone into freshman year of college, and my continuous problems that I had with connecting to people and finding a good place for myself had continued largely right into college. And so one weekend I took off into a very remote wilderness area we have up in north of me. I went to school in New Hampshire, up in the White Mountains, and I went out to this place that's 6 miles from the nearest road in the middle of nowhere, and a mile from the nearest trail. And I'm out in this mountain stream cutting its way through a remote valley with vistas all around it. And I had planned just to camp there, be as far away as I could and just spend time there. But I had gone alone, which is really not a very smart thing to do. Even experienced wilderness enthusiasts tell you that really not a smart idea to go somewhere like that, really remote, alone, because if something were to happen to you, you don't have cell phone service. And back then cell phones weren't even like they are now. And if something happens, who's going to find you? How are you going to have someone, assist you? And so I was stupid enough, though, to go out there and camp alone. And it happened to be during the fall, before these periods of when things like bull moose. You guys don't have moose in the UK, but you have
no,
large elk, I think, right? Large
we
deer.
know the bigger thing we have is probably a large stag. No, we don't have sort of like 7-8 foot moose.
Yeah, that's what I'm referring to. Yeah, something like
Yeah.
that. Yeah. So in the deer family, though, like the stag, but in the deer family, the largest of the deer family is the bull moose. And in this situation, I went to bed that night after actually seeing a bear, which was and two moose too. I'd seen all kinds of things. It was a wild experience. So I went to bed that night, and I woke up the next morning, and I was on this gravel bar with this picture of a mountain stream weaving its way around a corner with this big gravel bar. And I woke up at like 5:45 in the morning from this noise. It was ice everywhere. It was like the first really cold morning. I heard this incredibly loud grunting, screaming in the distance, and I peered out of my tent. Keep in mind where I am and how far I am from everything. Alone, I peered around my tent, and there was this enormous, 800 to 1,000-pound bull moose, male, running through the trees, crashing, running straight at me. Full run, head antlers down, running straight at me. And if anybody who's never been in an experience like that, it's very difficult to relate to, but I couldn't even speak. This creature, this enormous animal, comes rearing right up in front of me, and it stops within about 2 to 3 feet of me. And it's digging its hooves in and screaming. And I was like, that's it. I'm going to die. And if people that don't know, moose are one of the most dangerous animals in the northern North America and in northern Asia. They can, during their time when they're rutting, when they're mating, the males are extremely aggressive, and they set up these territory areas. And if kind of like a bull is aggressive in some ways. And so when you a cow, like a male bull. So when you are in those territories and you enter them, those bull moose can get extremely aggressive, and they can try to fight you, trample you, all kinds of different things. They get crazy during that time. So I fast forward, I wake up to this enormous moose digging its hooves in and about to basically trample right through me. And I couldn't even speak, and this moose is right there, and it basically turned and sort of walked away grunting the whole time. But that was just the beginning. Over the course of about 25 minutes or so, this bull moose kept running back and doing bluff charges on me over and over and over again. And he was circling this island of gravel that I was on, and he wouldn't let leave. He was telling me, go, or we're gonna fight. I'm this little guy that weighed, nothing compared to him. So I ended up, during this whole encounter of freaking out, I'm throwing all my stuff together to leave, and this thing is basically doing circles, grunting and then charging me, and I'm yelling at it, and the experience was beyond words. But anyway, I ended up packing my stuff up and running from it during this very, very small little moment where it had walked away a little bit, and it started chasing me. And so we had this experience where it's chasing me through the woods, and I'm trying to get back to the trail, not even the car. To make a long story short, I did make it back to the trail, covered in, all wet from the dew and cut up from the branches and everything. And I got back to my car 6.5 miles in something like 40 minutes. It was the fastest I'd ever hiked in my life. And I got back to my dorm room, and my roommate was still asleep. And he was like, turn the light off, you're making a lot of noise. And I had just gone through that entire experience. So what I did is I immediately sat down and I wrote for the first time something significant that I wanted to maybe publish. And that's where my entire writing career began, with that experience on top of some of the others that I had had.
Wow. Okay. Yeah, that's insane. That's a whole lot to have to then deal with. And don't you love that whole reality check of when you get back somewhere and someone's like, turn the light off, what are you doing? And you've just,
that's why I like to say that
you've just experienced this, like, yeah, I've had things at sea. I don't know, I've got a list as long as my arm as well, but we could be here just exchanging notes. Maybe we can do this as a completely different thing another time.
Yeah.
Because I think that
there's a lot to cover, though, right? We have a lot of stuff to talk about.
Do you know what? I'm thinking this actually, because there's folk I want to get on here in actually exactly that neck of the woods in the outdoors, and that link to where that takes you another time. But thank you for dipping into that for a bit, and then how that spurs on the writing and just in that moment. So being sort of like cautious of time, I wish we had hours, but for the purpose of our show, then we're kind of right. Okay, so what inspired you, and where did that go for you with the Sumerian outlet, the cuneiform tablets, and where that took you and the stage of time?
Okay, so it began with, believe it or not, I was spending that enormous amount of time outdoors, camping for days, sometimes in the middle of nowhere, and hiking and all that. And I would come back after days and days and days of being out in the middle of nowhere. And I would remember very distinctly the very strange feeling when that happens, when you're out there that long with no human interaction or nothing. When you come back and you're driving along in a car and you hear there's lights going by everywhere, the radio is blaring, it's really loud. I remember thinking to myself, wow, this world that we're in is so disruptive. I can't even concentrate. I can't think after what I just came through, and seeing how people, what they were focusing their time on doing. And that's where it began. I started wondering to myself why we've structured things the way that we have. I started asking questions. I started trying to understand why people are the way they are, why things are the way they are, why people are acting the way they are, and why they're not interested in knowledge, why they're not interested in learning about things that are incredible, that just blow our minds. That's where it all began. I started asking those questions. And the more I started asking questions, I started to just search online and read some books. The first book I read that blew my mind was called The Serious Mystery from Robert Temple.
Mm.
And I just was curious about things. Like, I just wanted to ask questions, and I did not expect at all to be taken down the rabbit hole that I was. I had no intention of being like, oh, I'm going to go dip my toes into the unknown, forbidden knowledge of history. I had no idea. I had no idea any of it was being covered up. None of it. It was completely unexpected that any of this happened. But what happened is I read that book, and it talked about how there's this tribe in Mali, Africa, that has had these traditions for hundreds, if not thousands of years, where they protect this knowledge of a star system called Canis Major, with the Sirius, specifically Sirius, the star system of Sirius A, B, and C. And they had this detailed knowledge of this star system before telescopes were even invented. And not only that, but they understood this precise alignments of some of these stars. And along with some of the stars hadn't even been discovered yet. Not only did they not have telescopes, but they hadn't even been discovered. And yet this primitive tribe in the middle of nowhere had all of this detailed knowledge about Egyptian knowledge and about the stars and energy and all of these incredible things. And they were protecting it through these shaman that would lock themselves in caves and not have any interaction. The story blew my mind. It started allowing me to start asking questions about how a tribe like that could have had knowledge about the heavens before even things like that had been discovered and given to them. But then, and that's, I guess you could say, that was the beginning of me starting to question things. So I came across the human origin story. I came across structures around the world that didn't make any sense. Things that were clearly much, much older than we're being told. And it's called a rabbit hole for a reason, because a lot of times the thing that you research, that you're looking into, leads to so many other things that you never intended on that even happening in the first place. And it's a rabbit hole because it keeps going deeper and deeper, and it connects to so many things that before you know it, it's so big that you could almost get lost in it. The truth, this aspect of eternal truth that exists with what really happened in history, what happened with our story. Who are we? What are we? What are we part of? There is fundamental truth that exists for that's been left behind from ancient cultures that are long ago gone, and it remains there today. And that's what really started this whole thing for me, because once I realized the scope of all of this, from nature and how people are disconnected to everything, all the way up to understanding who we really are and what we should be doing with our lives, the entire story unfolded in a way where it almost felt like I was being given pieces of it at different times in order to understand it. It's very strange, the synchronicities that went along with this. It really does. It's hard to explain unless people have experienced them, but it's like you said when we were talking earlier, you put out that energy and that intention out there, and then it just comes right back to you. And it really shows you that there's something much greater out there, obviously, that's connecting all of this in an intelligent way, or whatever you want to call it. We are part of something truly great. And that's what gives me the motivation to continue this.
That's, yeah, pretty epic. And as you said, we were talking before, and for me, there is nothing but those synchronicities. It's just a matter of how many do you miss based on what are you putting out there, because those messages come back. I've done it myself of going, why is no one talking to me? How do I get this?
Yeah.
Well, actually, these messages come through in different ways. Some of them are audios, some of them are visual, some of them is a feeling, some of it's a friend, some of it, anything. It's just whether can you remember the thing that you put out there in the first place, or were you just kind of lashing out in the universe and venting, basically. Yeah. So if it's done in a more of a cohesive fashion, you can remain open to what those synchronicities, you're open to the channels, I guess, the different ways of how that answer can then come back through, and you will know when you know, because it's a knowing, as opposed to, oh, it's this, or if you're just venting, you didn't really mean it anyway, so you're not going to get much of an answer. It's all jumbled up. And this has been some of my journey in order to kind of refine and clarify, what do you want? If it's not money and women and this, that, and the other, then what are you after?
Yeah.
And then obviously you start to kind of figure out it's refining that question, I think, and it's vital in order for you to stop lashing out at the world, stop thinking it owes you stuff. No, it doesn't owe you anything. You come here with a blueprint as such, but it's up to you then where you take that. And the more adventurous your life, well, the more payback, as far as I'm concerned, you're going to have options galore. That might be the difficulty then, is where you're going to go with it. But I want to sort of then jump into the why Sumerians, Matt? Were they, silly question, maybe interesting, were they nice? And and what does this mean for us today?
Okay, so the first place I want to start is that through my research and everything that I've studied and looked at, the Sumerians who wrote the cuneiform tablets are not the traditional Sumerians that we're taught about in school. And that's the first distinction I want to make, because I get a lot of questions about that, confused, saying, how can you say the Sumerians have the oldest writing on earth when blah, 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 this culture has existed before them, and all those things? And I want to clarify that first before I even start talking about this, is that as I've gone along this road of studying this very, very carefully, and I'll go into why that I've based this on my conclusions. When I've studied these tablets and ancient writings all around the world and structures and everything, I've come to the conclusion that it's not just that we think of one culture was alive at this time and then another culture was alive another time, and then that's it. For instance, the Egyptians, that's probably the best example we have, or even the Inca. It's not that the Inca, we'll use the Inca as an example in this. It's not that the Inca were the ones who built Machu Picchu. It's that the Inca was a group that came later that found the original base of Machu Picchu and then built on top of it. So then what does that mean? Did the Inca build Machu Picchu? No. What we think of as the Inca is part of a later group that came along. Because when you go to those structures, let's say you go to just across the Peruvian border and you go to like Pumapunku, Tiwanaku, you ask the locals who built this. They don't say the Inca or a group that is affiliated with them. They say something like the Tiki Viracotians or the Viracotians. And you start asking questions like, well, who were the Viracotians? And that's where you start to unravel down this road where you find out that there were much more ancient cultures that used to exist here that were wiped out. And it's the same thing with like the Egyptians. We look at things like the Great Pyramid of Giza and all the great pyramids of the Giza Plateau that exist, and they have never found a pharaoh in those pyramids ever. And there's no writing inside at all, matching the dynastic writing that we find on other structures around it. It doesn't make any sense. And you find out that all the pharaohs, like I always talk about, but all the pharaohs were buried over 400 miles south of the Valley of the Kings, and on and on and on. We find out that these structures all around the ancient world are much older than we're told, and were built by a much older culture. So to give an example of what I was just talking about with Egypt, what we find is that the culture that came before what we think of as the dynastic Egyptians, they were known as the Kemetians. And the land of Egypt was called Kemet. It wasn't even called Egypt. And the dynastic pharaohs were a group that came later. Now, that same mindset is the same thing for the Mesopotamian area with a group like the Sumerians. Now, what I've come up with after studying tablets is that there have been multiple different time periods of when those groups existed. And when we think of as the Sumerians that left the tablets, they're actually a much older version of that group that later repopulated that area and tried to continue on those traditions and ways, but they're actually a different time period than even the original group was. So when I look all around the world and we try to figure out what's what and who built what and who wrote what, we have to try to keep a really open mind and break out of this paradigm that we've been taught in school of saying everything is only 6,000 years old. This is who came when, this is who came after, and this is who built what. And it's all in this little tiny 6,000 year time period. And that's where the entire lost world ancient history story is, right? And before that, it's primitive hunter-gatherers before 6,000 years ago. And that's what we're told. And yet we have conclusive evidence all around the world. If you want to look at something like the Great Sphinx and the weathering around the enclosure of the Sphinx, and how we know that rainfall patterns would have not allowed that kind of erosion if it was unless it was at least 12,000 years ago that structure, those structures were built. And it gets all the way down into things like finding core drill holes and finding saw marks on some of these massive blocks built out of material that would have been impossible with Iron Age tools. Over and over again, we find these examples of cultures that are much older than we've been told. And so how does this connect to the Sumerians? Well, the story of the human origin story is one of the most important things that we have to understand, because it really connects everything. If you don't know where you came from, then how are you going to be able to define who you are now? And how is that going to ripple out into the actions that you take on an everyday level, and how you think about your role here? And then when I started, like you said, I originally had read some Zecharia Sitchin and some others, and I was absolutely, I guess you could even call it, obsessed with the story of the human origin story and this role of the Anunnaki. I was obsessed with it, but I had heard a lot of conflicting information, that some of his information was wrong, some of his translations were wrong. And I, as a researcher, I went down this road of saying, I want to provide this to people, because I feel like I'm connecting some important areas that a lot of other researchers are as well. But I want to provide at least my side of this to help others maybe learn in a way that's easier than some that teach it, I guess I'll say. Try to simplify it as much as possible for others, and then provide them with what they need to try to connect these things. So when I was really obsessed with learning that story and learning the truth behind it, I wanted to figure out who has translated these tablets in the most accurate way possible. I want to put a pause on put the brakes on the Zecharia Sitchin translations, and I want to go and see for myself what they say based on the best translators that have ever existed. And so I went on this journey of studying the entire history of cuneiform tablets, who were the best experts that have translated them, and then finding the most accurate versions of those tablets, because I wanted to know what the story was. I wanted to know what really happened to us. I wanted to know who we are, and if any of the things that Zecharia Sitchin were saying were able to be substantiated. And for those who don't know, you mentioned it before, but the only way to truly preserve a message, writing, instead of putting on cave walls or trying to write on paper or whatever you want to try to do, have cell phones or digital clouds, the only way to truly preserve a message would be to etch it into stone or clay. And then you take that clay and you would fire it, and you turn it into this really, really tough piece of material that's very difficult to destroy. You can't burn it. It's an amazing way to preserve a message. But instead of writing it on it, they etched their message into it so that it could remain for thousands of years. And some of these tablets may be over 12,000 years old, which is mind-blowing to consider. If you look at the entire story of industrialization with human activity over the last couple hundred years, and how far we've come since medieval times in only a few hundred years, and yet everything that we've seen, going to space and being in planes and helicopters and the digital world we live in, coming from an area of living in medieval times in only a few hundred years. Now imagine the opposite. Imagine a message that's been preserved for thousands of years, well over 10,000 years in some example, that is talking about civilizations that are no longer here, that have been long ago wiped out. And more importantly, even the civilizations that came later, that found the sites that they exist in, they're not even here either. So we're going back multiple epochs of different groups that have been here. And when I wanted to track down the earliest of that story, because if you want to find the source, you need to find the earliest version of that you can then clarify and compare with others of the same version to try to figure out if it's accurate or not, right? And so what I found was that in 1849, the largest catch of cuneiform tablets in the world was found in what's known as the Ashurbanipal Library by Henry Austin Laird, right? He finds this incredible catch of these tablets. They bring back all these tablets, and in the late 1800s, a man named George Smith is finally the first person able to translate them, because Sumerian cuneiform in Akkadian was a dead language that had been dead for thousands of years. In fact, the culture that came later that we think of as the Sumerians and Akkadians, they were the last group that even knew how to read that. After they were gone, nobody knew how to even read the language. And so here comes George Smith, well over 20 years after these tablets were first found, and he's finally able to be the first one to read and translate these tablets. And the first one he translated was the Epic of Gilgamesh. And he realized that he had stumbled across something incredible. And he was running around dancing. That's what they some of the witnesses saw, because he was the first person to read a dead language that hadn't been read in potentially over 4,000 or 5,000 years, depending on when the last time it was able to be. And that's a mind-blowing thing to consider. And so what he was able to find was that out of this huge library that was found, we had tablets that described nearly everything, describing what the human origin story was on multiple different types of tablets that would all verify each other. We found out what kind of catastrophes occurred in history that wiped out those lost civilizations, what happened to them, that we could later verify using things like ice core samples from Greenland and other geologic evidence. We find out who the Anunnaki were, these wisdom bringers, or whatever you want to call them, these influences of our history, and what role they played in the creating of civilizations here, and what happened to them. We find all of these answers to like literally everything that would want to ask. But the problem is those answers are so different than what we're taught in school that they fundamentally change the entire way that we perceive like who we really are. And I think that's where this really begins, when you say.
Yeah, no, it's fascinating. It's interesting to hear what stories are being played out still in mainstream education as to, well, everything else that's out there, which doesn't get like a look in. And my little boy came back and he's from school saying that about pyramids and finding kind of old dead pharaohs in them. Like, well, that doesn't happen. You don't get dead stuff in a pyramid, you know. So we went through what pyramid actual means, pyramid, so fire in the middle, and what does that mean? And then, you know, everything else that not everything else that comes with it. He's 6, but he's also got a dad that, like yourself, we've had these adventures where you go, look, the truth of the story, or the truths of the story are insanely good. They're amazing, and they really do link up. So therefore, clearly, everything else has been out to sever a link, as far as I'm concerned, which then says, well, who are you and what are you doing? Ultimately, a bit of a dodgy rabbit hole to go down anyway, because that side of things is being looked at now, which is fascinating. Never wanted to be seen, spotted, looked at, let alone investigated, when everybody else is just wanting to kind of join the dots and, you know, make it all happen. Well, we're talking about sort of origin stories and what this means for us. Well, this is a big one. But yeah, I'm just saying about the irony of, like, now in 2021, and we're still talking about dead things found in pyramids, and it's like, wow, okay. I don't really mind. I quite enjoy the
still peddling the old narrative, right?
Well, the education, the educative scrap, which clearly this side goes down a nothingness, which says nothing there, you know, no mystery, nothing creation going on here, no love, no connection, you know, just carry on. See where it gets you.
Yeah,
and it turns
move
out
along, please. Nothing to see here, right? Don't ask any questions.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, just nothing. Just keep going. This is what's on offer for you in the catalogue of life. When actually you put the catalogue in the bin, and you're talking about this whole, just everything else, basically, which then points to just the stunningness of us, which is actually, it's a tsunami now. I'm not fussed. I used to be, till fairly recently, a little bit perturbed by it, but actually now I can see the show for what it is, and how you can't put the toothpaste back in the tube. It can't be done.
Yeah.
So I'm not really fussed.
That's a good example.
Everything's smelling kind of minty. You know, there's still the The toothpaste is still there going, ooh, I'm toothpaste. But there's a mess that's been created, and that's not going anywhere. In fact, if anything, people are going to go, well, that's curious. So that, and off you go. And that, which is why your work is so commendable. And congratulations for bumping into Billy Carson there. I think, can you actually, could you give us a bit of a link in, actually, because I think that'd be quite nice. We don't have heaps of time. A bit of a link between where the where you just ended there with like the Sumerian side of things, and then where you intend to go, or where you have intended and clearly right now with Billy Carson from Forbidden Knowledge. Can you wrap that up into a thing?
Sure. So just to, I guess, expand on what I was talking before, there's so many areas to discuss.
Yeah.
I had realized that when I was going to read these tablets myself, that there were definitely discrepancies with Zechariah Sitchin. Now, I don't want to throw him under the bus to say everything he did was wrong. That's not true. But I did come to the conclusion that maybe half of what he was writing in his books was not what I was able to verify with tablets. So that he got half right. That's not terrible when you're one of the first people to put yourself out there to want to provide this to the masses. And I have to give him credit because he launched this whole Anunnaki story and cuneiform tablets that was largely completely unknown into sub-mainstream when no one else was doing it. So I do have to I have to commemorate him for that. But in terms of really getting to the truth, I decided to go off my own way at that point. I wanted to read these myself. I wanted to read as many as I could, and I wanted to try to clarify and compare other ones. For instance, there are versions of these in different cultures that exist. You can have a version of a tablet like the Enuma Elish that can exist in a Babylon format from an ancient city in Iraq, but you can also have a Nineveh version from the city of Nineveh. And there are different cultures that had different, they're different versions of the same story. So, and they're separated by great distances and sometimes time periods. But if you can go in and read them both with the most accurate translations and compare and have the same message, you go, this is a story that's been carried on by multiple different cultures in different places and preserved. It gives me a lot of, it provides me a lot of confidence that what I'm looking at and what I'm reading is real. And so what I did was I took George Smith's translations, because he went on to translate many, many, many tablets. And he was later verified by a woman named Stephanie Dalley at the University of Oxford. And so I was able to have these two Assyriologist experts, the best that exists, go in and read these and really find out what the tablets actually say, because it's a dead language. And what you find is that it's the most incredible story of where we came from, not the primitive ape, this primate that comes out of the jungle and maybe eats a bunch of magic mushrooms and starts playing around with stuff. Something completely different than that. Something that related to us being separated from the animal kingdom. Maybe we have the blueprint of an original primate, but we are something far greater than that. We are something that doesn't exist on this planet. We're something that is truly a being of the cosmos. And that is what I've found in these tablets, is that we were created here by great beings. And a lot of people might roll their eyes when they hear that, but we have to keep open-minded unless we go to read these. And you want me to talk about how this connects to what I'm writing with Billy and everything. These tablets, not only are they many of the most important ones are on my website. I've included some of the most important ones in like the Stage of Time, but not only that, but in the new book called The Epic of Humanity that I'm co-writing with Billy Carson, I even took it to a step even higher than that. And I had been telling people online that the Stage of Time has the most ancient translations from cultures of any book in the world. And I think that is true. But this book actually already has even more. And I'm not trying to gloat. I'm trying to show the significance of what I'm trying to do here. I realized that these tablets are relatively unknown. Most people don't even know where to get them. They ask me, well, where can I read something that's accurate? I don't know where to go, Matt. I just don't know what to believe anymore online. So one of the focuses of my writing, start staging Epic of Humanity, was to tell the story of our story, but to, whenever it's relevant, include a tablet that gives that evidence right in there to justify and back up what I'm saying. So if I give this fantastical story about who we are and where we came from, I can back it up with what these tablets actually state. Now, what they really state is that we are much older than we're told. Our story goes back much, much farther than 12,000 years ago, and that we are a being that is designed around perfection. It's designed around the image of perfection, of reaching higher states of consciousness and energy. And so when in the new book that Billy and Carson and I are writing, we're trying to preserve all of these ancient writings, the most important that exists, from pyramid text to cuneiform tablets to Gnostic writings and more, to try to preserve these all in one place. So if someone said, I want to know the story of humanity, I want to know where our origin story was, what cataclysms occurred, what cities used to exist long ago, what kings used to rule them, what the story was with all of that. My goal here is to preserve this ancient truth so they can never be lost again, because that's really what happened, is that because of these catastrophes that occurred on a level that we almost can't even comprehend, which led to the end of the last ice age, it wiped out all of these civilizations that wrote all of these things and left all of these incredible monuments and pyramids all around the world behind for us to find and try to figure out what their purposes were, what the story was. And that's what I'm so fascinated about, is that I've read all of these things directly. I've read as many tablets as I can, but not only reading them, I've studied them. And the conclusion that I've come out with is that essentially we are a great being that has the potential to be almost like a creator god in our reality, but in a physical and a non-physical way, because of the fact that we're designed around a perfection of energy. We are perfectly designed for this planet and the resonance of energy that this planet has. And that's really all it is. The planet is a giant energetic electromagnetism sphere that exists. And it's a sphere of energy. And that's what the ancients were trying to do, was balance and harness that energy all around the world. And you mentioned the pyramid, the name breaking down to fire within this great pyramidal structure. That fire within is this harnessing and balancing of that energy of the earth. And that's where you really start to blow people's minds, because they say, so then the pyramids weren't built to house pharaohs? And you say, no, they were built as what may be a massive, I guess you could say, energetic balancer potentially of the earth. I think both on a conscious level to awaken consciousness and reach higher stages of energy, but also potentially to balance some of these cataclysms that seem to happen, these catastrophes on a cyclical basis. And they understood that. And so to me, I get really excited when I talk about this, because it really does completely redefine everything in one's life if they go down this road objectively and they try to study it and really learn what this stuff entitles.
I've got a feeling we might need to do another one of these, Matt, if you're up for it, because there's so much to go down. There's
so big, right? It's so huge.
Yeah,
this whole thing.
it's absolutely huge, and I think what's really important is that, you know, as this show comes to its conclusion, that just to get the the main gist that what we're told in a mainstream neck of the woods, that hopefully by now, with what's been uncovered, not necessarily by the peoples before, it's who it's come from, but I mean about us now uncovering this essentially failed veil of who's it here for. Well, when you find out that it's not for you, never was, hence all the entertainment, you know, I still don't really understand why you can get porn on the internet easy. It still baffles me, yet you got kind of safety measures on everything. And then I know it's an entirely different rabbit hole indeed, but then there's these things which you go, okay, well, there's so much on offer for you that either stops you in your tracks, hesitates you, puts you on pause, or slowly destroys you, or even quicker if that's your choice. And that's the stuff that's mostly on offer. Well, a bit like the upside down. And for me, I've seen the world like upside down and inside out for forever, as far as I'm concerned. That's probably why I turned
Yeah.
to skateboarding, because and youth work, because no one's got an answer for it. It's its own thing, and you can't touch it. And I love these things that are kind of true to their core from the outset, because that's held me in good stead. And I like that people, one, have no real clue what then youth work's really about, and this skating, unless you're into it, is this thing that's just, yeah, okay. And I love that. I absolutely love that, because it's, for me, it's so imperative that you kind of go against, not necessarily, you don't have to go against like the main flow. At the same time, there's this excitement when you do, and then there's this draw to some of the things which you're finding and picking up and then running with and finding out it was way better than what was on offer. And actually, it links in the connections with my family. How come I like some but not others? Well, it's all about growth, right? It's all about then, you know, you are the story. And as you were saying before, about the like source and how we're all kind of off. Now, I was thinking this is one of those kind of like the light source that you get with all like the little fiber optics that come out, like this really pretty kind of thing. And at the end, there's the light. That's you. That's you. And you're connected to source in, you know, 8 billion versions of it. And I can't go down this rabbit hole either, because we'll be here again forever. But what I would really like, Matt, for the end of this is for you just to kind of, if you will, any last words, and also your kind of contacts and where people can find you.
Yeah. Can I just speak for just a minute on what you were saying there, just for a second?
Please do. Yeah.
Okay. I just want to, I know we didn't get to cover nearly as many areas as we hoped. But I want people to understand, from everything that I've looked at, one of the big motivators behind me doing this is not only that the story of us is incredible and who we are, but to me, it's like you said, there's a very clever system that's been created here. And you can trace the origins of that system back to at least the Roman Empire, where they felt the need to control information in a very, very organized way, and to control the masses in a way where they're kept in a certain state that it allows the most productivity, but also keep them distracted the most. Because I think there was a real realization long ago that we can be just used for productivity purposes, or we can be used for creative purposes. And there was a need to keep us in just a productive state, not asking questions. And I think you really can see that everything has been designed to keep us in this very, very low consciousness mindset state, where we're not, all these topics that we should be talking about are off limits for people talking about. You go to a party, you can't even talk about the things that really matter. You have to just talk about sports and television and all those things. And to me, it really quickly was very obvious that it's a very clever system that's been created for us to not delve into in the inner, inside ourselves, to figure out what consciousness is, who we are, how we can grow on all these different levels if we are aware, right? That very, very important word that I say awareness of awareness. You know, are we being aware of ourselves? Are we aware of our actions? Are we aware of what we're doing? Are we aware of how it's affecting others? It all comes down to so many different umbrella topics that we could go into on changing this paradigm here for the better and allowing humans to become what they were supposed to be all along. But it's just one of those incredible things that you just shake your head at, and you're initially mad, like you said, when you look back at the world from an objective standpoint. But in the end, all we can do is try to make whatever changes we can based on being as positive and being the best teachers we can to others, and allow them to figure out, you know, what's real. And if they want to continue the charade, or they want to forge a new path for themselves, a path that takes them on a direction that changes their lives forever. So if people are interested in my work more, and in the path that I call of truth, by studying ancient civilizations and structures and texts, you can find my work at thestageoftime.com. I have a YouTube channel at Matthew LaCroix. I have both audio, I have videos, I have books available on my website and online. And I just really encourage people to just think outside the box and don't be afraid about looking behind the veil, because what you're going to find may be unsettling at first, but it will always positively change your life in the end.
Matt, thank you for being a very extra special guest on LifeWise Radio. It's been an honor, and yeah, I think we've struck a bit of a chord here. Personally, I kind of love the journey. On a personal note, highly commendable, the whole journey from what you're saying about school and kind of outcasted as such, and then leading up to. So I just want to say a big thank you, Matt. And for sake of when recording, I'll say thank you. And until next time, this has been LifeWise Radio. This has been Matt LaCroix. Thanks, Matt.
Thanks. It's a pleasure to be here. We'll have to do it again soon.
Thank you.